Hello, and welcome to History 1301. I'm trying something a little different this year. I'm trying to record my lectures before class so that you can watch those in the comfort of your own home. And then at home or at school during class time, we can actually work on the assignments together so that after class, you can complete your discussion boards. In case you haven't noticed, I talk a lot with my hands. I hope that's not going to be too distracting. Okay, so we're going to start the first week. We're going to talk about colonization of the New World. Now, first of all, understand that when we talk about colonization in the New World, we're talking about Europeans coming to the New World. There were already people here. There were thousands of different nationalities, American Indians that spoke a variety of languages, had a variety of religions, a variety of cultural differences. Sometimes they warred with each other, sometimes they allied with each other, sometimes they formed empires, sometimes they formed political alliances. They fought over resources, they traded with each other. They were very much, because people are the same everywhere you go. All right, but some things that were missing, metalwork. The Aztecs could work with copper and gold, and they traded with some of the pueblos in what is now New Mexico and Arizona. But for the most part, metal tools and metal weapons were not around. All right. Other things is that while they did have organized government with decided hierarchies of chiefs and leaders, they didn't really have written constitutions. Their traditions were and it all goes down to pepper, nutmeg, and cinnamon. Three spices that make all of our food a little bit better, but are really hard to get in Europe. For years and years, Europeans had traded with East Asia. Actually, that trade started when the Romans were still in control of most of Europe. In fact, the Romans had laws that forbid certain things from being sold to Chinese people, to the Chinese Empire. All right, the Europeans would send glass work and silver work across the great Asian continent, paying taxes along the way. In India would trade cotton with Europe, and they would trade cotton with Asia, with East Asia. East Asia would trade for spices from the islands of Malaysia and Indonesia. They would trade silk and bronze and jade, and amber would come in from the northern Europe, and there was a lot along what we now call the Silk Road, and that trade was dynamic and very, very profitable. All right, Europeans, because there's a couple things you got to understand. It doesn't matter where you are, what culture, what language, people want to look good, and people want to be comfortable. And so because of that, the trade with Asia, between Asia and Europe, was very, very lucrative. And for a long time, it went along just fine. However, there was an empire called the Mongol Empire. And the Mongol Empire was making serious bank off of this Silk Road. And they worked a lot to keep that Silk Road safe. But when their empire began to decay, and we see the rise of Russia, we see the rise of some of these independent states in the Azerbaijan and some of these others, that road becomes very unsafe to travel. And even those places that were safe were highly taxed. And so European countries like Portugal and Spain began looking for other ways to get to Europe. To get to Asia. And Portugal starts the way. They're right there on the edge of Europe, so they sail south go around, find out Africa is bigger than they thought it was, and they set up little trade colonies along the way. And along the way, they trade with the Africans. They trade salt for gold and ivory and some other important commodities and things like this. All right. Eventually, they're going to also be doing this with slaves. All right, and then they're going to sail on the rest of the way. Well, Spain can't go south because, Portugal's already there. Why do what they've already done? So this Italian navigator comes to him and says, hey, you know what? I can reach Asia if you'll just give me some boats and I'll sail west. And then you're like, well, you know what, we'll give you 3 boats and a couple, maybe 100 people, so it's not too big of a loss. Go for it. And so, of course, that's Christopher Columbus. He sails, he finds his new land, and this opens up a whole new possibilities and for trade and for markets and for land. And this is going to really push a lot of this colonization. Europe is a small area with a very dense population. And so they're always in their need, they need more land, especially if they've got a surplus poor population. They need somewhere to put them. They don't want to just put them in poorhouses. And so they need a place that they can put people. Wealthy people, it was illegal. For example, in England, it was illegal to sell land. You couldn't, like if you were a wealthy noble, the Count of, the Duke of Earl or something like this, you can't sell your land. It's illegal, which means there's no new land to buy. And so as population increased, people become wealthier off of trade and off of some good economic situation, right? Then they want to buy land because you couldn't invest in factories. Those things didn't exist yet. And so they want that land in order to be able to build wealth. All right? So they begin looking overseas as potential for land. And so that is really kind of the beginnings. Some of the things that they do, for example, is they form companies. Another invention that comes along about the same time is the joint stock company. The Dutch, the people from the Netherlands, invent this idea that, and it all goes back to the Asia trade, that if I invest, say, $100, 100 ducats or something like this, and I go and I lose everything, I'm out all that money. But all the profit is mine too. Well, the Dutch come up with this idea of a stock company where you buy a part of that company. Like instead of this expedition is going to cost 100 ducats, I only have $1 that I can invest, 1 ducat that I can invest. It says, well, okay, so that means that you own 1% of this company, and which means that you get 1% of the profits. And if the company is a total bust, you're only out 1 ducat. That's not very much money. And so it really encouraged a lot of investment. Of course, nowadays we have the New York Stock Exchange, and there's the London Stock Exchange, and that's where these things came from because people actually started trading. Well, I'll trade you my share of this business for however much money. And people go, yeah, sure, okay, I'll do that. And so this is coming along at the same time. And so when the English began colonizing the New World, these are business decisions. These are businesses that are trading the only thing that they have, and that is a royal charter that says this land between this river and this mountain and this ocean and this hill belongs to you, the Virginia Trading Company. And so they go over there and they're like, we got all this land and nobody wants to come. So what are we going to do? We got all this land, but if nobody buys the land, we're going to lose money. And so they come up with some incentives to encourage people to come to Virginia. And these incentives are important because I think we're going to see a pattern here. All right. One of the important things in history is to look for patterns. And so the Virginia company comes in and goes, because there were a few people that came, and so I'll say, they'll go, you want more land? Well, yeah, of course I want more land, but I don't have the money to pay for it. It's okay, well, I'll tell you what, if you will sponsor another person to come to Virginia to increase our population in this colony, then we will give you 50 acres of land. Oh, hey, that sounds like a good deal. But it's expensive for a person to move to America. What else is in for it? It says, well, not only do you get the 50 acres of land, but that person is going to be indentured to you. They're going to owe you a life debt of between 4 and 7 years. And during that 4 to 7 years, they are yours. You can trade them. You can beat them. You're not allowed to kill them. You can marry them. You can prevent them from marrying or dating or anything like this. You could abuse them. You could put them to work doing the nastiest jobs, whatever jobs you don't want to do. But at the end of that contract, they are a free person. You have to give them a change of clothes and usually a small amount of money. The idea was that they're now going to go and make their own fortune. So you get 50 acres and between 4 and 7 years of labor out of somebody. All you got to do is sponsor them and keep them fed and alive during that time period that they're indentured to you. Now all of a sudden this is beginning to look like a good idea. And so the wealthiest people, what you end up happening is the wealthiest people are the people with the most land. And they are bringing over unpaid labor to work that land. They're not working it themselves. They're not getting out there and planting tobacco. They are getting other people to work it. If this sounds like this may be a pattern that we're going to see in all across Virginia and then all the way south, you're right. Because eventually, starting in 1619 is an important year. I'm not a big dates and dead person's guy, but 1619 is a really good, really important year because 3 things are going to happen in Virginia that change America. Number one, they're going to form their own legislature called the House of Burgess. They get kind of tired of some of the things going on and they're not working right. So they kind of make their own. They get the wealthiest landowners together and they start making some of the rules there in the colony. Number 2, they find a crop that they can raise that's going to make money. And that money comes from tobacco. In fact, tobacco is going to be the same as cash. You could go into a store and there would be a price and this is going to cost this much silver coins or this many what they call knots of tobacco. Tobacco knots are just you take a certain number of leaves, roll them up, tie them in a little overhand knot, and dry them. And those are going to be the same as cash in Virginia, which is good because nobody had any hard money. Excuse me. And the third one is a ship's going to arrive in Richmond Port carrying a different kind of indentured servant because these indentured servants are not from Europe, they're from Africa. And they are going to be sold as slaves. So the first African slaves will arrive in Virginia in 1619 as well. So now we have a cash crop, which is very labor intensive. We have a labor source, and we have a local government making the rules about how you can treat that labor and what you could do with that crop. That's the makings of the South, and that legislative body is made up of the wealthiest landowners. If you didn't own land, you couldn't be a part of the House of Burgess. So this is going to be a pattern. And then in the Carolinas, in Georgia, in Delaware, Maryland, we're going to see this pattern repeated again and again. And it's going to set up that idea, and it's going to start the United States, particularly the United States on the South, on a very specific economic and political and social course. And that's one of the things I want to get to you is that a lot of these early things are going to they don't just go away. Okay, so these indentured servants, all those slaves. So the first set of slaves that came, those African servants, were treated more like indentured servants. But within a few years, about 10 years, they were indentured for life. And then another 10 or 20 years after that, then you have a really big change. And that is, well, you know what? If I own this person for life, well, then I own their children for life as well. And Virginia will now develop 2 cash crops, tobacco and people. Virginia's second largest cash crop in the mid 1700s are slaves, are people. They're taking and they're selling them to each other, and they're selling them to the other newer colonies as well. This is part of why Jefferson and some of the other big slave owners in the 1780s were willing to outlaw the slave trade from Africa because their main crop was selling their slaves and the children of their slaves. So it was good business for them. But anyway, going back to Virginia. So you have a lot of people coming over as indentured servants. And it should be noted that some of these indentured servants didn't have a choice to come, because what the Virginia Company did was they hired people to go out and find indentured servants. And so you would have these recruiters that go out. And some of these recruiters weren't terribly honest. They would go to what's called a hiring fair, and they would talk up Virginia, and they would talk up, oh, it's going to be great. You're going to eat eggs and bacon, and life is going to be wonderful. And it wasn't. It was hard. You had to work hard. You maybe had bed bugs in your straw bed, and maybe your master was grumpy, and and he didn't treat you like you think you should be treated. It was hard, and you have no recourse because you've signed a contract not knowing. Other people were given a choice. All right, here's what we're going to do, because imagine, okay, prisons were overcrowded, and so recruiters would come in and they say, hey guys, I just heard that because of overcrowding they're going to hang 10 of you tomorrow morning. And the prisons would do this, by the way. You can imagine being arrested because you stole fruit in a market, find out that your prison cell is overcrowded, so they're just going to hang half of you. So you could potentially be hanged for stealing an apple. So they would come in and go, all right, you know what? You haven't really done anything too serious. You're not a murderer. You're not a rapist. You're not a violent thief or criminal. So we're going to give you a choice. You can either be hanged in the morning, or you could go to Virginia. All of a sudden, even if you weren't thinking about it, Virginia is sounding really, really good. And so you're going to be like, sign me up. So you get out of prison and you get a free trip to Virginia. All you got to do is give up 7 years of your life. And at the end of that 7 years, they're going to give you a little bit of money, a new set of clothes, and you're in America, and you're going to try to make a new world, a new life for yourself. And maybe, and you leave your family behind, you leave your wife behind, but you know what? It's better than swinging them from a rope. It's better than being hanged. And in fact, a lot of the indentured servants left their families behind, and the little polygamy there going on, which is a bad thing. And that's also partly why, by the way, there were way more men in the early colonies than there were women, which is, next week we'll talk about what life was like in the colonies. But that's going to set the stage again. All right, so another thing that would happen is these recruiters, maybe they're falling behind on their numbers. So they're going to get a big knapsack, right? A big bag, throw it over your shoulder, big knapsack. And there's a lot of homeless kids in London and in Liverpool and some of these major cities, because landowners in England were doing something called the enclosure movement. They were replacing all their grain fields with sheep, which don't take as many workers. So they were kicking people off of their land, and they were all going into the cities and being unemployed. And so a lot of times what they would do is they would come in at night and they'd find some kid sleeping and go, yeah, he looks strong enough and big enough he can work in the fields or work somewhere, right? And so they grab this kid, put him in a knapsack, take him off, throw him on a boat, and say, hey, look, here's your indentured 10-year-old. Here's your indentured 14-year-old. Or whatever, hey, don't be mean to him, follow all the rules and everything like this. This is the origin of the word kidnap, because you took the kids and you put them in knapsacks. So not everybody who came to Virginia came willingly, and that, of course, also includes Africans. Africans, they brought them in, and they brought women over from Africa and made them slaves. I saw a really interesting poster one time that I thought was really good. It says they didn't take slaves from Africa. They took people and made them slaves, and that's exactly right. The African tribes would make war on each other. And one of the things you did to make sure that you could continue to exercise control over this particular village is you would take all the men, because the men could wield weapons and they could make war on you and maybe break free, and they were a threat. And so you would take these men and you would sell them. You would take them to places like Gorky Island, and you would sell them to traders that are going to take them to mostly the Caribbean. About 90% of it went to South America, and then a bunch of it went to the Caribbean. Only about 3% of African slaves actually came to what's now the United States. That's still a lot. But that Atlantic slave trade, it served the purpose. You got some money if you were a warlord in Africa. You got the money um, from selling the slave, which was usually in the form of beads or other trade goods, and you really cemented your hold on these other villages, this other area, because they didn't have any men to make war, and women were not expected to be soldiers and to take up arms in the defense of their villages, and they really oftentimes weren't even necessarily thought of as a threat. But occasionally, other things you might do is, you know what, you got a lot of people in this village. That's a really nice village over there with a lot of good houses and good land. So maybe you do sell the women and the children as well as the men, because then now that village is empty and you can send all your family over there. You can send all your people and they just occupy that land. And you get, your house is already built for you. Maybe your field's already plowed for you. You're stepping into a pretty good situation. At least until the village beside you does that to you. And so that begins to happen a lot. So you have all these people coming over to Virginia, some by choice, some sort of by choice. I don't know if I would say a prisoner is by choice. I guess it is, because they could have chosen to stay behind and be hanged. And then some it's because of the kidnapping and because of the African slavery were coming over, and it was not their choice at all. But that's what that southern colonies are all going to be about. Commercial agriculture, very labor intensive, and and unpaid labor. Land is going to equal wealth and power. And so that's going to be that pattern that is repeated over and over again across the South. Okay, my next video, I'm going to talk about how things were a little different in the North. They still had slavery, but they came for a slightly different purpose, and we'll see. All right, so I'll see you in class, and have a great evening.